The Ottoman Empire is a curious example of an empire that kind of forced history's hand when it came to its own dissolution. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire had fallen greatly from its old territorial and prestigious heights, but it had kind of reached a tenable point. After losing the majority of its territory in Europe, the Ottomans only truly had to manage its Turkic homelands and its Arab territories. Truly, this could have been where their fall stopped. Had they regrouped and reformed from this position, the Ottoman Empire could have remained a player on the world stage into the 20th century. But instead, the Ottomans gambled it all, and lost. Ottoman entry into the First World War will always remain a point of confusion to me. The empire was reeling and weak. They had little to gain from the war, and what they did stand to gain had powers much stronger than them standing in the way. The Ottomans would go on to join the war on the side of the Central Powers, only to be beaten back by the Russians and British, marred by a British-sponsored Arab revolt, and collapsing in on itself in 1918. Out of the ashes rose the Republic of Turkey, reduced to just Anatolia and having thrown out its sultan. Turkey also relinquished its position as the head of Islam, opting instead for a modern secular republic. But what if, instead of treading down this disastrous path, the Ottoman Empire had remained neutral in the First World War, allowing itself to continue on its existence beyond 1919? There were many within the Ottoman ranks who did not favor an alliance with Germany, including many within the ruling party, the Committee of Union and Progress, or CUP. In an alternative timeline, this faction of the CUP launches an internal coup against Enver Pasha, the Minister of War and head of the Ottoman army. With this faction in charge, the navy is never ordered to fire upon Russian ships in the Black Sea. The Ottomans declare their neutrality in early 1915, deciding that entering the war could only bring further ruin to their empire. Without the Ottoman entry on the side of the Central Powers, the war goes on almost completely unchanged. The Ottomans were little more than a slight annoyance for the Russians and British, and provided little to no benefit to the Central Powers' war effort beyond siphoning some enemy troops away from other fronts. Without the Ottoman entry into the war, the Central Powers are still defeated and surrender in 1918. The Ottomans would continue on, now in a changed world. The powers that had zealously exploited them in the spirit of Victorian imperialism had just beat that zealousness out of each other for 4 years. The Russian Empire had fallen, replaced by the Soviet Union. Britain and France's economy and pride lay in tatters, indebted to the Americans. So how would the Ottomans do in this new world? How would they operate? Well, to understand the Ottoman Empire at this time, one must understand its leadership, namely the CPU. The CPU pushed the modernization of the empire, with military, infrastructural, and political reform. However, they were also extremely authoritarian and nationalistic. I believe the years after World War I would see the Ottoman Empire continue down this path of modernization, but would also see the continued forced assimilation of minorities, with Turkish and Islam being forced upon groups like the Kurds and Armenians. Speaking of, without World War I doubt ethnic tensions between the Ottomans and the Armenians would have boiled over into the genocide that we saw in our timeline. The Ottomans were paranoid and embarrassed over their losses to the Russians, and took such frustrations out on the Armenians, killing anywhere from 600,000 to 1.5 million people. The Ottomans would still suffer under the mountain of debt they owed to Britain and France. However, they were about to discover something new in their lands, something that would change the empire forever. Oil was discovered in Iraq in the 1920s, and while oil had not quite yet reached its astronomical rise in price, this discovery would surely give the Ottomans a decent source of income. Perhaps they could offer the British exclusive oil rights in exchange for a relief on their owed debts, finally freeing the Ottoman economy from the shackles of foreign powers. Well, mostly. As the 1920s drew to a close, the Ottoman Empire would begin to assert itself into the global trade and market, rejoining as a stable, modern nation. And then, the Great Depression would hit. Just as the rest of the world was, the Ottomans' economy would be shaken by the Great Depression. I could see the economic woes birthing a nationalistic and Islamist movement within the empire, perhaps leading to an irredentist sentiment against the British and Greeks to retake territories wrongfully taken from them, to throw off the shackles of British exploitation once and for all. If such a movement found itself in a place of power, it would naturally find an ally in Germany. It's here that I'm going to divide the scenario into two separate possibilities. The first, where such sentiments I've just described do in fact rise in the 1930s, and the Ottomans join the Second World War on the side of the Axis. And one in which, just like our timeline's Turkey, the Ottomans stay out for the bulk of the war. The Ottomans joining on the side of the Axis would completely change the course of the war. I see a likely time this would occur to be late 1940, when the Italians invade Greece. Simultaneous to the German Balkan campaign and Bulgaria's invasion, the Ottomans pile onto the Greeks, joining the Axis. Just as in our timeline, the Greeks are defeated. The Ottomans occupy parts of Thrace and the Aegean Islands, maybe even taking a chunk out of Macedonia. But the theater that would truly see the Ottoman Empire's entry prove disastrous for the Allies would be the North African front. Depending on how well the Ottomans had modernized their army in the past decades and how much support the Germans would send, I could see the Ottomans seizing the Suez Canal, splitting the British Empire, and renewing the Axis push into Africa. Soon all of Egypt would fall. The Ottomans could also clean up any British holdings left in the Middle East, likely subjugating all of Arabia in the process. And now we reach the German invasion of the Soviet Union. As you may know, the German advance was initially devastating for the Soviets, only to be stalled in August 1943 at the Battle of Stalingrad, as the Germans attempted to seize the oil-rich lands of the Caucasus to keep their war machine going. In this timeline, the Ottomans, supported by the Germans, join the initial offensive from the south. Whether the Ottomans are able to directly conquer the Caucasus, or are merely able to take some pressure off the Germans in the north, there is no disastrous battle at Stalingrad that stops the German offensive. The Caucasus are seized, the German war machine is fueled, and the Axis momentum continues past 1943. From here, with the British Empire split in two and the Soviets' one spring offensive from complete collapse, I see an Axis victory in World War II as a near inevitability. In the spoils, the Ottomans are awarded overlordship over the Middle East and Egypt, with the exception of the Suez Canal itself, which I could see the Germans wishing to maintain direct control over, as well as the southern Caucasus with its oil fields, where I'm sure an ethnic cleansing of non-Turkish populations would commence. The Ottomans would stand as a major regional power and oil supplier in this Axis-dominated timeline, finally among the great powers of the globe once more. And now to the other timeline, where the Ottomans, just as Turkey in our world, remain neutral for the duration of the Second World War, only dogpiling onto the Germans as they collapse to secure a place in the United Nations. How would the Ottomans operate in the Cold War world? In short, much like our timeline's Turkey, the Ottomans would be a firmly anti-communist nation, and depending on how democratized the empire had become by now, they may join NATO. However, the Ottomans would be in a perfect place with their Arabian holdings to profit extraordinarily from the rise in oil prices. Likely subjugating the tribes of Arabia and integrating their oil supply, the empire would see a massive influx of extreme wealth, likely becoming one of the richest nations in the entire world. The Ottomans would also find themselves in a unique position as decolonization takes course. How would the Ottomans assert themselves as a regional power over an independent Egypt? How would an Ottoman-Iranian rivalry affect the politics of the Middle East? And how would they respond to the rise of Arab nationalism? The Middle East, such an important part of the global stage during the late 20th and early 21st century, would be completely changed. Would 9/11 still occur in this timeline? It is funny how much the world can be completely shifted by a change in history that seems so regionally specific and frankly a footnote. If nothing else, it shows the countless decisions made and small events that brought us to the world we have today. Change one outcome, make one tiny shift, and you may just find a world completely changed.